Welcome to our webinar, everyone. I would like to promise a COVID-free zone today, but that's probably not going to happen because it's still very much out there. My name is Laura Riley. I'm the Head of HR and Compliance at Nicholson's Accountants. I'm a qualified HR and management professional, and I'm going to be your host today. Nicholson's offer HR advice, as well as a myriad of other services, which includes payroll and tax. I'm sure some of you already know that, though. Joining me today is Lucy Pitfield, our resident HR consultant, and Katie McMinn from Task HR. Katie is very well established within the HR community. Lucy and Katie have got a great webinar lined up for you all today. We're going to cover absences and refusals to work. It could be for a variety of reasons, of which we'll go through shortly. We're planning for you to be with us for about an hour or so. So if you've been with us before, you'll know that we make the session as interactive as we can. Please engage with us and others in the chat box. Lucy and Katie will give an overview and cover off some scenarios which we thought you would be able to relate to and find quite helpful. We'll then have a Q&A session for everybody. You can see below there is a Q&A box if you just hover over. If you type your questions in there, we will answer them in priority order. And if there are questions that you like the look of, then please give it an upvote because it will push it to the top of the queue and we will answer that one. We'll do as many as we can within the time. There will be some questions that have been sent in advance. So if there aren't any questions, we'll go to those and you'll be able to see some of those in the chat box. And then we'll have an exclusive after party for our HR partner clients, and you'll have one-to-one access to us all. So without further ado, I will now hand over to Lucy and Katie to tell you all about to return or not to.
Hi, thank you, Laura. So what we're going to be covering today is, if I can have the next slide, please, is getting employees back to work after the lockdown, what we can do to support the employees, and what we can do if employees are worried about returning or refusing to come back to work, so as Laura's already said. So the first thing that I wanted to do was ask what you guys think. Can you force your employees to return to work? Now we're going to launch a poll for you so that you can answer that question rather. So if you you can tell people are not looking at. Okay. Just like last sentence. So you guys think if we end that poll? So 25 of you reckon yes, you can. This is one of the questions that we're going to be covering as we go through, but it's interesting to see you know, what you guys think to that. So if we have a look at the next slide. The first thing that we're going to have a look at is reasons why employees may not want to come back to work. So, the first reason why people want to come back, obviously we've got a lot of people off at the moment looking after the children, and with the children not going back and some going back, interestingly all of mine are going back over the next couple of weeks, but I know that most schools are going to be staying off until September. So that's one of the main reasons why people might not be able to come back. And is maybe because they are shielding or vulnerable. Obviously we've still got a lot of people that are vulnerable to the coronavirus, which is going to be able to come back.
Lucy, you just keep breaking up a little bit, maybe your bandwidth perhaps. Okay. There might be somebody doing Netflix in the background, so yeah.
All of the children are out, they've all gone, so I apologise for that. Let me know if you are struggling then, and I'll hand it over to somebody else to talk.
Yeah. If you're struggling, guys, just pop it in the chat box and we'll just go through it. We'll pick it up.
Okay. So having a vulnerable or shielding might be an issue for some people, and also fear of catching the virus. So actually, you know, they might have a genuine fear that they might be vulnerable to catching the virus. Another thing that's
it's doing it again. It's doing it again, Lucy. So I'll just cover this slide off, and then yeah, we'll go back to it. So they could have fear of catching the virus. Some people are too afraid to go out. They're too anxious to even get on, you know, a bus. There's a claustrophobia around wearing face masks. I know some people are experiencing that, and that does tie into mental health issues as well. There could be a variety of reasons. People could find it very stressful. You know, there could be people with post-traumatic stress disorder who are very worried about going out and have agoraphobia as well. Public transport, some people do rely on that to get to work, and it might be an essential journey that they have to make. There's no other way. They don't have a car or a bike, or they may be disabled, physically disabled, and need to get public transport to get to and from work. But also people might enjoy working from home. I know that there has been a huge uptake in productivity for some businesses where people have really enjoyed it, and actually having found that it's possible, working from home, you know, there shouldn't really be any barriers to that if they've proven they've been able to do that for a number of months. Have the next slide, please, Leanne. Okay, do you want to pick this bit up, Lucy?
Yes, and I've hopefully spot my microphone now. So can you hear me?
Perfectly, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so what options do employees have? Okay, so one of the first ones is they could leave the employees on furlough. Now, I just want to quickly run through the furlough options. Obviously, we're going into a new furlough period as of the 1st of July. You can go with it. Basically, the July, during July, the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme will pay 80% of the employees' wages. August, the government will pay 80% and employers are expected to pay national insurance and pension contributions. September, that goes down to 70% from the government and 10% from employers. And October, the government are going to pay 60% and employers are expected to pay 20%. Now, one of the questions that I have been asked previously is, can we just pay the employees 60%? That's going to be a no, you have to pay them the 80%. Just a couple of notes on the flexible furlough scheme. So currently we're in the, what I'm going to call the furlough scheme until the end of June. The 1st of July, we're going to be going into the flexible furlough scheme. Now, employees can be on the flexible furlough scheme if they have already had a claim made between March and June. If you need somebody on the furlough scheme now in June that's already been on the scheme, they will still have to stay on the scheme for 3 weeks. If you put them on a new period between now and the end of June. If you put them on a new period as of July, then that can be flexible. There's no time constraint as to how long you need them on there for. You can flexibly furlough for whatever hours you want to for your employees. So for example, the employees could work every morning, or they could work 3 afternoons each week, or whatever works for you and your employee. They can't do any work whilst they're classed as furlough, as the agreement is now. But they will need a new agreement, and we have been sending out agreements to our payroll clients. So if you're one of Nicholson's clients and you do need a new agreement, a furlough agreement, please get in touch with us and we can send that out for you. And the reason why they need a new agreement is because they were classed as furloughed workers previously, and now they're classed as flexible furloughed workers, so that their status has changed. And also there's quite a lot of different rules around the flexible furlough scheme claims between like different dates and things like that. So if you need any help with that, again, get in touch with us. So another option for the employees is obviously part-time working. Now, like I say, whether that be using the furlough scheme, or you can ask the employees to come back on short-term working or flexible on part-time working, and obviously you will have to agree that with the employees. You could potentially employ temporary staff. So if you've got workers on furlough and they can't come back for one of the reasons we've already suggested, then you might be able to bring them back, a temporary member of staff in to cover that instead. You could ask them to use holiday for the period if they can't come back, or they could have unpaid leave. Or again, you could use parental leave. Now, employees are entitled to parental leave, and there's various rules and eligibility around that as well. So if you need any help with that, that's an option. Also, employees are still asked to work from home if they can work from home. So if your employees are able to work from home, then they should still be working from home. And the other option is to have staggered start and finish times. So you can have, you could start later, finish earlier, or, have some employees start at 8 o'clock, some employees start at 8:30, some employees start at 9. I know that's what our school are doing, my children's school are doing. They're staggering the start times to make sure that the children don't interact with each other in their different bubbles. So yes, it's another option that you have for your employees. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Katie now to go through some scenarios with you.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. Just remembering to take myself off mute before I start talking. Right, so as Lucy said, I'm just going to run through some scenarios for you. And these are some common scenarios that lots of businesses are having to deal with at the moment. And so we'll just run through those and what some of your options are if you come up against these. So the first scenario you'll see on this slide is in relation to Rob. So Rob is a single parent with 3 children at home, aged 6, 8 and 10. And he was furloughed because the schools were closed and so he had no childcare. But he works in a shop, shops are reopening and the business now really needs him back. And so what are the options here? So first of all, the first option is he can ask to continue to be furloughed if he doesn't have childcare in place. That is still an option for businesses to use. What we would always say in these situations, though, is first of all, really to have a conversation with that employee. If there is work for him to be doing and you need those employees back in the workplace, have a conversation and really understand, talking to him about what could the options be, how can you work together to try and make this work. Now, Lucy's already mentioned that one of the main issues so many employees are facing at the moment is that schools are sort of opening on a very phased basis. We've got pockets where they are opening, pockets where they're not, with different year groups going back and so forth. And so try and really understand what his individual situation is. Could you, for example, think, could he do some part-time work? Is there an option where, for example, if the children are going to school on a reduced timetable, there is some flexibility for him to do some part-time work? And again, with that flexible furlough scheme that comes in from July, that's something that could potentially accommodate that. Do you have other employees who would be happy to take on those extra shifts, in terms of covering the shop hours? Because again, there will be people out there with very different circumstances who may actually welcome the opportunity to take a little bit more on. So there are different options. It always really starts with a conversation to really understand what the difficulties are and how you can work with the employee to work around that. If there really isn't the option for that employee to come back to work because of those childcare options, and he simply does not have any means in place of dealing with that, then the other options to consider are parental leave, again, which Lucy mentioned, unpaid leave for a certain period of time, or using up annual leave as well. So those are the real options that you've got there. And not forgetting, of course, that furlough scheme is still in place and can be used for childcare reasons. Okay, and next slide, thank you. Okay, so the second scenario we're looking at is around Jill. So Jill works in a care home as a carer, and she was furloughed because she was told to shield by her doctors. So what are the options here? So the first thing to say, when it comes to shielding, it's really important for businesses and employees to be very careful and really take extra steps for anyone who falls into that vulnerable group who has been advised to shield for medical reasons. So the government at the moment is telling people who have been shielding to continue to do so until the 30th of June, and then they will revisit it and review. So at the moment, if anybody is being advised to shield, then they should be allowed to continue to do that at least until the 30th of June. And then it's a case of looking at what that updated advice is from the government. You certainly cannot force somebody to return to work if medical advice has told them to shield at this point in time. What you can do, however, is obviously seek evidence if there's any reason why you think it may not be the case. You can ask an employee to actually provide some evidence to show that that medical advice has told them to shield. Okay. All right, thank you. And then scenario number 3. So scenario number 3 is looking at Dave, who is a mechanic in an MOT garage. He is very worried about being back in the workplace and catching the virus. And so as a result, he's very reluctant to return to work. So again, if we look at what some of the options are for you as a business. So if you genuinely can't run your business remotely, and in this case, I imagine that is certainly the case, and you require and need your employees back into work, then what you need to do and what you're obliged to do is ensure that you are creating a safe workplace for people to return. So that is making sure that risk assessments have been completed, any adjustments to the workplace are put into place to provide extra protection, and the provision of PPE if that's required as well. Again, it does come back in this situation though as well as to having a conversation with that employee. So it's about actually understanding what are the concerns that he has about returning to work. Why is he particularly worried about catching the virus? Is it, first of all, that he's in a vulnerable group himself and maybe shielding? So again, that relates back to the options around the previous scenario, that he shouldn't return to work if he's shielding. Is it that he's worried about catching it in the workplace? And if that's the case, that's very much a case of, as a business, you talking to him and really explaining the risk assessment you've gone through, really explaining the steps and processes that you're putting in place to keep him safe within the workplace. Or is it that he's worried about actually getting to and from work? We've talked a little bit about concerns around public transport, concerns around having to wear the mask on public transport. Is it that he can't get to work without using public transport, and that's what's driving the worry there? And if it is the case, then again, it's coming up with a solution that works for both parties. So could you adjust the start and finish time potentially, so that if it's a busy period on public transport when he would normally be needing to travel, you could adjust that slightly so that he could travel at a slightly quieter time. So it is very much the duty of the employer to protect your employees. So it is about making sure that safe workplace is provided, and it's about communicating that and making sure that employees are really aware of how you're keeping them safe. Ultimately, if you've gone through these options and he still is not comfortable coming back to work, the other options you've got, again, are thinking about unpaid leave or annual leave as an alternative as we sort of move through this next period. Okay, thank you. And then scenario 4, please. Right, so scenario 4 is all about Sophie, and Sophie works at a factory and she's refusing to come back to work because she has anxiety about leaving her house now that she's been at home for so long. So this is a really important one, because it's an absolute given that the COVID situation is going to have a significant impact on the mental health of many, many people right across the world, not just here in the UK. There will be some employees who are fearful about catching the virus. There'll be some that are very anxious about their own family and relatives who they may be mixing with. And there may be some who have suffered bereavements and haven't had the opportunity to say goodbye. There's been so much going on. And so there's going to be an awful lot of mental health sort of baggage and issues that people are having to deal with. And so as an employer, it's really, really important to be sympathetic to this, and really important to show support as much as you can, but also recognising that as a business, you need to get back to work. You need your employees back in the workplace so that you can reignite your business and get going again, so that you can start planning for the future. So there is a balance there to be struck. Employees do have a duty to protect the health and safety of their employees, and mental health does fit under that umbrella though. So if somebody is saying that they are literally just too anxious to come back to work because of that reason, they don't feel comfortable leaving the house, the first thing is, again, it comes back to communication. It's talking to them about what is that anxiety about, and again, what are the fears that they have. Is it the workplace? Is it traveling? Is it something more specific to them as individuals? So talk to them about how you are ensuring that they're going to be safe. Talk to them about how they would travel and how you can support and adjust things for that. But it's also important, if they are saying that they're suffering from anxiety, has that been diagnosed? So have they been to the doctor and they've been diagnosed as suffering from anxiety? And if so, it may be that they're being signed off from work, and so they'll need to be supported with that. If that is the case, it may be worth considering looking at occupational health. They will be able to give you advice as to, right, how do we support this employee? How do we support their return to work, and whether there are any reasonable adjustments that the business can do to accommodate that, and ideally focus on getting that person back in the workplace. If they're not signed off, if it hasn't been diagnosed and they're still not willing to return to work, obviously always advise them to seek medical advice if they are flagging that as an issue. But is it possible to come up with a phased return to work where you are supporting them so they ease back in gradually, which helps them manage that anxiety and see that actually you are providing that safe return, and it is going to be okay for them. So going forwards, the focus on mental health for all employees is really something that we'd encourage all businesses and all employees to really take some time to do as we go forwards, through communication, through regular check-ins and risk assessments where appropriate. Because what I would encourage all of you to think about is what will come out of this period of time is people will look back on the organisations that did the right thing. And those organisations typically are going to be the ones that come out better than this. They're going to be the ones that have the more loyal staff, the more engaged staff, which ultimately is going to help you as a business to really move forward from all of this. Okay, thank you. I'll hand back to Lucy, I think.
So that's the end of the presentation, and we're now going to move into answering some questions live. I can see that we've got a question there, just a solo question. So we're going to answer them in priority order. If we do not have any more questions, we'll move to some that have already been sent in advance, which you can probably see in the chat box. But if you can think of any more, please pop them in the Q&A, because it's much easier for us to go through and to look at which ones have and haven't been answered. So the first question that's come in is from somebody who is anonymous, and they would like to know, do we have any indication as to how long employees who can work from home will be asked to do so? And I'll ask that to you, Katie.
So at the moment, the guidance is really to continue. So employees who can work from home should continue for indefinitely at the moment. So I don't believe we do have a date as such. It's more about just keeping in touch with what the government advice is, which, as you know, is kind of is coming out on a daily, weekly basis. But if the work can be done from home, then the advice is to continue to do so for the time being.
Thanks, Katie. And so we're going to go to some questions that have been sent in advance now. But if you do think of anything and something jogs your memory and you think, oh, I'd like to know the answer to that, then please do still pop that in the Q&A box. So the next question is, what happens if an employee gets signed off when they're due to come back from furlough? So for example, that would be next week. They're due to come back, they're coming off furlough, and then they get signed off. So I'll pass that one to you, Lucy.
Okay, yeah, so if they're going to be signed off after they've come back into work, then if it's to do with the coronavirus, then they can claim SSP from day one, and employers can actually claim that back from the government for up to 2 weeks. So and it will be a case of the usual, how you usually deal with the absence. So if it is coronavirus related, then it needs to be that they stay at home for, they need to isolate for a week, and obviously anybody in the household needs to isolate for 2 weeks as well. And then it'll be a case of getting them back into the workplace. And obviously we do have the testing that they can do now as well, and that's quite a quick process.
Great, thanks Lucy. While I was asking that and you were answering, we had another one sent in. So another person who wishes to remain anonymous would like to know, we currently have staff working from home and it's working well from a business point of view, but some of the staff don't find it convenient for them and they're asking to come back into the office. I don't want them to as a business owner for multiple reasons. And so where do I stand on that? And I'll ask that to you, Katie.
Okay, so in this case, if you've got people working from home, the work can be done from home, and that is happening at the moment. Obviously, some people, it doesn't work for everybody, and some people really are missing that social interaction and the sort of the face-to-face contact. However, at the end of the day, my advice here would be, as a business owner, it's up to you to make a call in terms of what you're comfortable with, what is safe for your environment. So if you feel it's not the right time and you can't provide that safe environment, then I would say it's fine for you to say we're continuing to work from home until we can guarantee that that the workplace is safe for you. Not sure if there are any other comments from other panelists on that one.
No, I'd agree with you on that, Katie. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's following the guidance first and foremost.
Yeah.
And if you can't follow the guidance, it's about having contemporaneous evidence as to why. And it's about documenting your thought processes, what you've considered and how you've reached your decision so that you can evidence that in the future. Thanks, Katie. So the next question, we've got another one that's just come in live. So I think that's very similar to the one we've already had. So I'll move on to the next one that's been pre-sent in. And that is that an employee is refusing to come to the office, but they actually can't work from home as their work involves a lot of paper. So almost the same problem, but in reverse to the question just asked. So they actually won't come to the office. How do you manage that situation if you've got somebody that just won't come into the office and they can't do the work from home? How do we deal with that? And I'll pass that to you, Lucy.
So yeah, I think it's just a case of sitting down with them and kind of understanding what their worries are about it and why they have an issue with coming back into the office. If it is that they can work from home and the paperwork can be sent to them at home, then it's worth kind of thinking about what you as an employer can do to facilitate them, working from home. And even if they can pop into the office and collect the paperwork, as long as that's safe for them to do so, and take it home and work on it from home, then that's another option as well. So I think it's a case of kind of sitting down with them and having that discussion with them as to why they are worried about coming in, and kind of looking at solutions, both of you and your employee, to look at solutions as to how you can get the work done.
Thanks, Lucy. We've had a question sent into the chat box, so I'll ask it, and it's from Paul. Paul would like to know, if someone can't come off furlough for childcare reasons, will I still be liable for the extra contributions come August? And I'll ask that to you, Katie.
So my understanding is, as long as you are on the furlough scheme, then or you're using the furlough scheme as a business, you do need to adhere to the rules around that scheme. So if an employee is on furlough when it comes to August, then yes, the employer would have to pay the national insurance and pension contributions.
Great, thanks, Katie. And got another question that's been pre-sent in, so I'll just keep going through them. We are running pretty dry on questions, guys, and I'm sure that you don't want to hear me singing the national anthem for the next 10 minutes. So if there's anything else you want to know, now is the opportunity to ask. So the next question is, and I'm not going to do that, by the way, the next question is, I've got an employee on long-term sick. They're now ready to come back, but they want lots of PPE, and I don't actually think that's necessary. What can I do? So I'm going to ask that one to you, Lucy.
Okay, again, I think it's a case of, you know, sitting down with them and understanding why they think they need all the PPE. Obviously, for your industry, you need to look at your guidance, because the government have been quite specific with the guidance as to what's needed in each workplace. So yeah, I think it's just a case of kind of having those conversations with the employees and coming to an agreement between the two of you as to what is actually necessary and what can be done to get the employee back into the workplace. Now, if that is that they would like, you know, more protection, then as long as that employee feels safe and they can do their job in that safe environment, then I think that's kind of the priority for employers at the moment.
Great, thanks, Lucy. And just something I've been thinking about as we've been going through this webinar, I think, a question around health and safety at work, I suppose. If you've got an employee that you've managed to get back to the workplace, so after, you know, much deliberation, they've finally come back, but then they refuse to do certain tasks. For example, they won't wash mugs, you know, and there's a shared kitchen area and they've got concerns around things in the workplace. How would you suggest that is managed if they're threatening to leave work again because they just don't feel safe, they feel they're being asked to do things unreasonably? So I'll ask that to you, Katie, if that's all right.
Yep, that's fine. It's a very good point, because I'm sure, you know, lots of businesses will be dealing with that kind of thing. So again, I think it's about if there is an employee who is back at work, who is then saying, actually, I don't feel safe, it's looking at what those specifics are and what can you actually put in place to deal with those concerns. So for example, you know, the simple things like mugs, is there is there a dishwasher, for example? Is there a way that employees aren't having to do that? Or is it a case of, okay, well, we will enforce a rule where actually employees bring their own mug in and they're only responsible for washing up their own mug? It's about, basically, it's about taking each individual situation on its own at the moment and making sure that each individual feels that their concerns are being listened to, that they're being addressed, and that ultimately they do feel safe. If they really have come back into the office and they really feel that there is not enough being done and they feel that they are in danger, they do have a right not to have to come back into the workplace. But what I would always recommend is it's very much about talking to that employee and trying to work through those particular issues to try and come to a solution and put their mind at ease.
Great, thanks, Katie. We've had another couple of questions sent in, I'm pleased to say, so you're all saved from my horrible singing voice. So this question's from Patricia, and she would like to know, if you've got an employee, you've done all the talks, the risk assessments, but they just still refuse to come back, can you continue to keep them on furlough? And I'll ask that to you, Lucy.
Yes, employees can stay on furlough as long as there's, you know, as long as you can say that it's not safe for them to come in, and as long as there's a reason why they can't work, a coronavirus reason why they can't work, then yes, they can stay on furlough. I mean, if they've been furloughed previously anyway, then yeah, they can stay on furlough. But obviously that is going to, in the long run, as the time goes on, that will cost the employer the money as the system goes down. As the coronavirus job retention scheme money reduces, the employer will be liable as we go through. So it is a case of kind of understanding why they don't want to come back and putting everything in place for them that they can come back in if you need them in.
And I think I think she's just, yes, I was going to say, I think she's just added to that, if it is safe for them to come in. So if you've got any thoughts on that, Katie, I think you maybe we're going there.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. So yes, if the employer was agreeable, as Lucy said, yes, you could continue to have them on furlough. But as a business, if you do need them back and there isn't a reason for them not to come back based on safety, you don't have to continue to keep them on furlough just because they would prefer that. It's about sharing what that risk assessment has been, how you are ensuring they're safe, and if they are still refusing, then you need to look at other options, which may be annual leave or unpaid leave in that situation.
And obviously there is the possibility that as time goes on, there may be dismissals at the end of that. But it is something that should be very, very carefully considered for a number of reasons, which I could do probably a whole webinar on, but some of those being health and safety detriments under the Employment Rights Act, as well as potential whistleblowing. So do tread very carefully before you take any advice. And that's obviously something people here can help with. Okay, so I've got another question that's been sent in, and then I've got some more on the Q&A box. So we'll just go through those, and then I think we'll call it a day when we get to the end of the bottom. So we've got about 5 more questions to go. So another person would like to know, if an employee refuses to go out on other sites to work, even after we've undertaken a stringent risk assessment and presumably the risk assessment is okay, what can we do as an employer? So I'll throw that one over to you, Katie.
Okay, so in this situation, you've undertaken a risk assessment. They are refusing to go onto other sites. Again, it comes down to what are their concerns. So first of all, is it some people may have a concern about moving from one site to another and mixing with different bubbles of people, and that could be seen as a reasonable concern, and it's something that a lot of us are aware of at the moment. So I would have a look at that, understand the reasons why. Or is it the fact that they're having to travel in between sites? Is it that they're coming into contact with different people? So first of all, understanding what the concerns are and trying to address those through sort of communication of the risk assessment that you've been through. If they are still refusing, then is there a way of actually changing things around a little bit so that an employee does just work on one site and you have another employee covering another site? So it's trying to be a little bit creative as well, to be honest. How can you use the resources to meet those needs where everybody is feeling comfortable? Again, if it does come down to it, that actually it is a fundamental part of that role that they need to move between sites, and they're still refusing to do that despite those reassurances about health and safety, then again, it comes down to that their options then are unpaid leave or annual leave potentially. But again, as you know, as has been mentioned, in typical circumstances, we may say at this kind of stage, well, if they're refusing to return, it could be a disciplinary matter. We are urging employers to be very, very careful about taking that approach at the moment, just because we don't know how things will go in terms of claims that come out of this around that health and safety whistleblowing side of things.
Great, thanks, Katie. The next question that's come in is asked from somebody anonymously. Is there a limit to the amount of staff that I can flip on furlough? So for example, one team member has been back at work but needs to take pre-booked holidays. Can I re-furlough them and bring back a different member of staff? And if so, what is the limit on how many times one can do this? And I'll ask that to you, Lucy.
Okay, so you can furlough and unfurlough your employees as much as you like. So there's no kind of limit as to how many times an employee can be furloughed. Obviously at the moment, until the end of June, they have to be on furlough at least 3 weeks. And if they haven't already been on furlough before, then they needed to have been furloughed for 3 weeks. So which means that the last cut-off date was the 10th of June, which I know now we've missed. But if, for example, they've not been working for the last week, then obviously you can put them on furlough as of the 10th. When we go into July, you can have them there's no limit when we go into July as to how long you can have them on furlough for. So you can, the 3 week limit then is gone. So you can have them on furlough for a couple of days and then working for a couple of days and furlough again for a couple of days. And that's what the flexible furlough scheme is there for. When you're making the claims, you have to make claims for 1 week periods, and you can't have different claims overlapping each other. But that's not to do with kind of who's furloughed and when they're furloughed. That's just to do with how the claims are done in the background.
Great, thanks Lucy. So I'll ask this to you, Katie. We've got somebody else that would like to know, if an employee stays on furlough, especially if they take a secondary job, what can the main employer do? So I'm assuming that that will be if the employee refuses to return to their original employment that they've been furloughed from, but have taken secondary employment elsewhere.
Okay, yes, I was just going to check whether that was what it meant. So if that is based on the assumption that's what the question is asking, if somebody is on furlough, they have taken a secondary job, but their main employer actually needs them back at work, then the main employer can take them off furlough. The employee cannot choose to stay on furlough if the employer does not agree to it. That's regardless of whatever other work they might be doing. It's the business's decision whether they agree to furlough. So if there is work to be done and that employer wants to take that employee off furlough and have them return to work, then they can ask them to do that.
Great, thank you, Katie. And then we've got another question from somebody else who wishes to remain anonymous, and that is, can you explain the rule on the maximum number of people who can be on a furlough claim with the new rules? So Lucy, I will throw that question over to you.
Okay, so I'm presuming that you're referring to the rule whereby you can only have, as of going forward into the flexible furlough scheme as of July, you can only have the maximum number of employees on the scheme at any one time that you have already had on the scheme between the March and June in the first furlough scheme. So for example, if you've had employees in March, you had 10 employees on the scheme, in April you had 10, and May you had 20, the maximum you can have on the scheme going forward is 20, because that's the maximum you have already had on any one claim previously. Hoping that answers the question.
Thanks, Lucy. And then the last question we've had come in is a question from somebody that's popped it in the chat box, and it's about testing. So an employee is living with an individual identified under the clinically extremely vulnerable group / shielding. She would rather work from home, which she has done so far. She would like to continue to do this, and I would rather that she comes back to the office. What are the rules around that? So I'll throw that one to you, Katie.
Okay, thank you. So if an employee is living with somebody who is in one of those very vulnerable groups and is shielding, and they are working from home, then the employer really, if there's any way that they can accommodate that, should continue to do so, because otherwise by trying to force that employee back to work, you're ultimately putting that person in the vulnerable group at risk, because that person is going out of the house, interacting with other people and potentially bringing things back. So wherever possible, I would always encourage that working from home to continue for them.
That's lovely. Thanks, Katie. So I think that brings us to the end of our questions today. We hope you found it useful. We've really enjoyed presenting to you on a topic which we hope you've had plenty of benefit from. I know that there's a lot of different situations that are unfolding in front of us at the minute. To ease the process, we have issued a return to work form, and we'd like to share it with people that are on this webinar. So if you would like to know more about that, please get in touch with Lucy, hrmail@nicholsonca.co.uk, and we will happily send you a copy for free to help you get your workforce back into the office or the factory when the time is right. As always, we love feedback, so if you've got any thoughts on future topics, we don't want it to be too dry and we don't want you to be, oh, not another webinar. So please do give us feedback. We are more than happy to consider all suggestions to make it better. The next one we're doing is going to be on flexible working, which will cover flexible working requests, digital working, and how to utilise Zoom, along with all the fancy features it has. And that's on the 23rd of July. So we hope to see you all then. For those of you who are retained clients, we've just made you panelists, so you can join us for a one-to-one after party. Please hang on and don't leave. For everybody else, thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye for now.